Thank you, everyone, for coming. Matt, thank you for your time, of course.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm going to start with a confession, Matt, that before this week, and I was told that I was going to be sitting and having this conversation with you, if someone had asked me about WordPress.com or .org, I probably would have thought of a dusty relic from the early 2000s, possibly even an irrelevance. And I would have been wrong, because 42%, 43% of the world's websites are built on WordPress.com or WordPress.org, including the White House, their website, NASA, Beyonce, Rolling Stones, Automatic, your company, of course, in which WordPress.com sits, is worth $7 billion US, and you're innovating. Is this dominance that you now have in terms of the infrastructure that underpins our online world, is that kind of growth by stealth, by design, or something else?
Well, the mission of WordPress is to democratize publishing. And so in a lot of ways, we're like the dark matter of the web. And that's you, by design, when you're on a WordPress site, it's about you. It's not about just another profile page on a social network that looks like every other profile page. We're trying to optimize so that you can customize everything, really make it your own, not optimize for advertisers. Our customers are our users, not a third party. We set out to basically create like an operating system of the open web. So one cool thing about WordPress is it's all dynamic. So every single WordPress site also has a full set of APIs, that there's different feeds, there's a REST API, there's going to probably be an MCP server built in the next release or two. So it's very rich content. That's why it does so well with Google and SEO. And now that all the LLMs are going crazy, actually our bot crawling, I think has tripled and quadrupled in some cases over like the Google Bing era of everything, because there's so many new agents coming online. And so if you have a store, if you publish, it's one of the most important times to do it, actually, because then your thoughts will be part of the future superintelligence. And so I'm as excited as ever. And we often say, 42% is cool, but 58% to go.
Okay.
There's a lot of work ahead.
You still have that drive and that ambition, because you've been at this for almost 2 decades, for almost 20 years.
Yeah, so WordPress 22 years and then Automatic 20 years. And I hope to work on it the rest of my life. It really is I don't think we're ever going to be done, because tech changes, the world changes. I mean, think when we started in 2003, there were no social networks really, besides like 6 Degrees or Tribe, if you remember those. iPhone wasn't out, like everything was different. And that's kind of what happens in technology, is every, call it 4 to 7 years, there's a monumental shift. And being able to surf those shifts is what makes the companies that last decades versus the one that lasts just a single cycle.
And I want to get to how you're surfing the shift around AI. But before I do that, you have been, in your career, from the beginning and still, pretty messianic about the need to focus and build open source versus closed source proprietary systems. Are you winning the argument? Why are you so determined? Why has that been a driving factor for you?
I mean, open source to me is the most powerful idea of our generation, of the past 30, 40 years. Because really when you think about how technology is influencing, starting to take over more and more of our lives, how we drive, how we get around, who we date and marry and procreate with, like all these things are being influenced by technology now in a way they never were before. And this means software and algorithms are now driving our cars, cooking our food, teaching us, telling us, training our kids, changing how our brains work by what they show to us. So, what open source fundamentally does is it gives you the 4 freedoms. The 4 freedoms of open source are, first, to use it for any purpose. So I can't tell anyone how they should or should not use WordPress. And I think that's really, really important. 2 is, because that's like essentially freedom of speech. These are like the Bill of Rights for software. 2 is the ability to see how the software works, so kind of open the hood. And it's not just a black box. You can actually see every single line of code. 2 is to modify, 3 is to modify the software, and then final freedom is to distribute those modifications. Now, those freedoms are essentially like the coolest hack anyone's come up with to ensure like digital autonomy and agency as we go forward, as technology becomes more and more important, possibly even embedded in our brains. I want that chip in my brain to be open source. I don't want it to be getting like firmware updates from some random company.
Have you talked to Elon Musk about this aspiration of yours?
He is a big believer in open source.
Yeah.
And they open source their patents around EVs. Actually, a lot of the biggest tech leaders are truly deep believers of this. You can see it in Mark Zuckerberg and all the open source they've done. Now, many of them also have businesses which are proprietary. And sometimes that's easier, or sometimes it's just necessary. The Facebook application being open source might not actually be that useful, because really what's driving all the value is the data. So,
when it comes to LLMs and what's happening in terms of Gen AI, you have OpenAI on one side of the spectrum. It seems, ironically, of course, not open but closed in terms of their model, alongside Anthropic, alongside DeepMind of Google. On the other spectrum, you've got the likes of Mistral over in France to some extent. You've got Meta. I know you take issue with maybe that characterization. Meta says it's open source. DeepSeek in China, for example. Is OpenAI winning the closed proprietary system argument, given how dominant that business is now?
I think it wasn't a proprietary argument as much as a safety argument. So I think the reason that OpenAI sort of went more proprietary was this worry that these models would disrupt society in a really negative way. And so they wanted to be able to control that. Now, as we've seen with something like DeepSeek, which is as capable as GTP 3.5 or 4 in some cases, it benchmarks incredibly well. And it's fully open source, open weights, every possible way you can be open in a LLM context. And the world hasn't ended. I mean, some might argue that. But it's a lot of the predicted dangers have not come to bear. And so I think that the safety, what they call AI doomers, and people used to talk about their P-doom in San Francisco. Like, you go to parties, you talk about P-doom, which meant the probability of like the world ending. And people would just like say at parties like, oh, I'm a 0.6, I'm a 0.1, I'm 99, and that would be a conversation or a debate that people would have. And 3 or 4 years ago, a lot of people, including myself, had much higher P-dooms. And I think many have been bringing that down. In fact, OpenAI has talking about fully open sourcing some of their older models, or making open weights for some of their older models.
Do you think you hold on to that conviction as we get closer to AGI or artificial general intelligence? Some have suggested it could come in the 2030s. Is that still appropriate to have open source models around AGI?
I believe so. Now, as you said, I'm a bit of a zealot around open source, but I think the safest outcomes for us, for sort of like more true AGI type models or ASI models, is that there's many of them. And that creates like a balance of power, a détente between them. If it belongs to only one country or one entity, I think that gets a bit more dangerous.
You are a coder by heart. What happens to coders in a world where GitHub, Copilot, and OpenAI, Lovable, and others allow people like me who have very few technical skills to be able to code and build apps and websites very, very simply? What does that do to your ecosystem and to people working in your space?
This is such a good question. Because I, over like my first 15 years, convinced tens of thousands or more people to learn how to code. It was really one of the things I would say every time I spoke. I kind of paused on that for about a year, and I've now come back to it. So I do believe you should think of it like learning a language, and that part of the world will become more legible to you. Coding or programming is also a way of thinking, and I believe that even as vibe coding as you can do, where it's creating something just without you having any understanding of it, that's one level, but that will then become sort of like not that impressive, or not that maintainable, or not that, basically it'll pale in comparison to what the folks who can prompt and vibe code with a knowledge of an understanding of what the agents are doing, or a better way to speak to them and direct them. So just like I say, even if you want to be a manager or a designer, you should learn how to code, because then you'll be able to interact with the engineers and coders better. I think it's important for people to be kind of multi-hyphenate, with code being one of those things. Also learn a bit of design, learn some typography, learn a little bit of marketing, and that way you'll be able to direct the agents so much better. And by the way, the agents can teach you these things pretty well. So it's nice that you can now have a 24/7, infinite patience debug, co-pilot, essentially, a buddy.
What does it do for jobs?
Now, I think that probably in individual companies it might be a little deflationary. However, just like with every new technology, the opportunities it creates are probably going to outpace that initial deflationary trend. So more new jobs get created when every new technology trend happens, but all the initial stories are like, oh, all the horse buggy whip makers are losing their jobs. And they miss that there's going to be 100 times more cars than there ever were horse buggies. And so This is why I encourage people, though, to play around and learn these technologies, because it is, I think, going to be a bare essential for being employable in any knowledge work job in the future. The people who are fluent with AI will win over the candidates who aren't every single time.
What does it mean for your business if you can create, using agentic AI or other platforms, to be able to very easily, at the click of a button, create a website? What does it mean? Does that not just completely erode your business model?
I think there's going to be a lot more people creating websites, also because the websites are such an important source of data for the LLMs. So if you have any sort of business, it's actually going to be more important to have a place that you control that has kind of your data. I think it's also possible, this is for publishing, so if you publish anything on social networks, I think you need to bring that into your own site, because some of those, I think, will not be around. They come and go. I think some of them might close down their data or make it less accessible to sort of keep the data from each other, which means all the things that you published on Instagram are not going to be available to OpenAI or something like that. They're all going to lock down. So if you can then bring that to your own open website, all of that, at least what you want to be available and part of these systems, can be available. And then it'll just so much easier to create a website. We already have some of this where you can just talk to something and it makes a very complex WordPress website. One cool thing is that training, what you train the LLMs on has been challenging. There's copyright questions, fair use questions. By the way, I have no idea how that's all going to work out. But what I do know is some of the safest stuff in the world to train on is open source code. So even the early versions of OpenAI had read every line of WordPress's code and all 60,000 plugins and themes. They're all GPL.
Because it's been stress tested.
And it's an open source license. So that means, even early versions, you could say, write me a WordPress plugin, and it just would one-shot it, meaning it would get it with one prompt. You didn't have to iterate a lot of things. And that's just getting better and better. So I think anyone in this audience now, where before you could have made a WordPress website, now you could code a custom WordPress plugin just using ChatGPT or Anthropic.
And under the automatic grouping, you have Tumblr, you have WooCommerce, which takes on Shopify, you have text apps as well. You've got a whole stable of products. How are you using AI right now in the business?
The two places that I'm most excited about AI. So a lot of people don't know that in addition to our open web apps like WordPress and WooCommerce, we have some mobile apps that are quite exciting, multi-platform ones. So we merged Text and Beeper, so that's going to be Beeper. So day one is probably the best journaling app. So think of it like private blogging or journaling. It's fully encrypted with the same encryption as like a 1Password. It syncs to all your devices, and the more you use it, the more valuable it is. And it's amazing now that, because I journal daily, being able to log in and see, on this day, this many years ago. It's incredible therapeutically. It's very cathartic. It's also great for memory. But just journaling, writing in general, is something I will always advocate. As a writer yourself, I imagine. So imagine now if all that journal, essentially your second brain, downloaded, and you can put in pictures and audio and everything else, was available to a local index on your phone or device, a local LLM. You don't have to put it in the cloud. By the way, you probably shouldn't put this stuff ever in the cloud, because all the cloud stuff gets hacked.
Wait, so you shouldn't ever put anything in the cloud? I mean, we're all putting stuff on the cloud. Most of us.
Yes. Yes and no. There's some things I would never put in the cloud. Okay. I'm trying to build a technology world where people have more control over that. Because if I run an advertising company, I need you to put everything in the cloud in a way that I can read it, so that I can target you and use it for advertisers and everything like that. When you're creating an open source, user-centric, customer-centric company, my first concern when building things as an engineer, and I actually feel this is an ethical obligation, is to make sure it is the most secure and the most privacy-preserving as possible. Because privacy is a human right, and I actually believe security is a human right that is getting more and more difficult to protect as our technology systems become more abstract or maybe more vibe-coded and insecure. So I believe it's our obligation as a company to build these things in a super secure way. So imagine your whole journal being part of an LLM. You can ask it questions, talk to it. It can remind you of things. It could be like your personal coach. And as the models our phones already have incredibly powerful AI chips, essentially. That'll get really good. And then the same thing with messaging. So we have this new Beeper is all-in-one messaging. So who's ever forgot which network they sent someone a message over? Was it WhatsApp? Was it Telegram? Was it, or who has more than one messaging app? Everyone, right? Yeah. So what Beeper does is it brings them all into one app in an encrypted local way. So it's just as secure as using the native apps, but it puts it all into one. And
Is it as secure as Telegram and Signal?
Yeah.
It is?
Yeah. Well, it matches their security.
It matches their security.
Yeah. So it basically clones all of the systems and puts it all local. Very difficult technically.
Yeah.
It's available in beta right now if you just search in the App Store for Beeper. The setup's kind of a pain because we need you to connect each network individually. Obviously, we can't do that ourselves. But once you do, man, it's really cool. And you get cool features like scheduled messages across things, unified search, filters like show me people I've messaged that haven't replied back. And of course, then with new AI stuff, we'll be able to do more prompting, prioritization, spam filtering. There's a lot of stuff we can do in a centralized way that becomes a lot more efficient. And I consider this one of my new missions, actually, to democratize.
Is this you taking
messaging.
on WhatsApp then?
Well, what's nice is it's complementary.
Okay.
So it gets WhatsApp more users. However, it also is more user-centric in that you now have a unified inbox, essentially, where you can see everything and manage everything. And in the future, we can start to work more open source messaging into that. Open source messaging is very niche right now. There's things like Matrix and to some extent Signal and stuff, but they typically have some sort of centralized aspect or a proprietary layer.
I want to talk about Tumblr, which is one of your properties you acquired, a few years ago. I want to talk about it in the context of content moderation. Meta, famously, a few months ago, Mark Zuckerberg announced they were walking back, gutting their team, essentially, when it comes to content moderation. It seemed to align with the change in politics in the US. How are you thinking? Have you been tempted to get rid of your team when it comes to moderation?
No. I'd say moderation is more challenging than it's ever been. There's kind of two layers. There's the things that are very, very clear. That's things that are illegal or dangerous, and I would actually be highly doubtful that any of that team has been cut at any of the big companies, because it's really there's legal obligations as well to all of this. And then there's two, hate speech, misinformation, and particularly as you get into more the misinformation side, things change and it's vague, and it is probably, not probably, I think it's a role where governments, we need better court systems, better legislation, better maybe even panels, that can check these things in a more democratic fashion versus us saying hey, company, do this.
Did the Biden administration, did they go too far on this?
I think, on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
But there are some pretty egregious examples under Biden, but under Trump too. The power of the big tech people, in particular, became a challenge and threatening, and it became very adversarial. And I think historically, tech really supported the Democrats, and so when they started feeling like they're our enemy, and there were these a ton of strange investigations over things that seemed minor, or acquisitions, weird acquisitions would get blocked. Facebook wasn't allowed to buy Giphy. Giphy, it's a GIF search engine. They chose to block this and not WhatsApp or Instagram. That just seems petty. Those sorts of things just felt very antagonistic, at least from the outside. I'm not inside any of these conversations. I think it's an evolution. The big tech companies have larger populations than any country in the world. They have instant access to notify billions of people, and the algorithms 100% influence how we think, subconsciously and consciously. So this sort of amount of power has never been concentrated in one platform before. Hence why I would like more and more of this to be open source. And actually, ex-Twitter has talked about, and they've done a little bit, of open sourcing some of their algorithms. Blue Sky, which is a competitor, is actually letting you pick the algorithm that drives your feed. So you could have an algorithm written by a major media organization that you trust, the New York Times or The Economist, or you could have an algorithm written by your friends. You could write one. These sorts of things, I think, control over our information diet and information consumption is, I think, going to be key for actually solving our mental health crises as well.
Look, you split your time. We touch on politics, and I'll move on shortly. But you split your time between San Francisco and Houston in Texas. Is the tech kind of Trump loving that we've seen since the inauguration? Is that continuing, or is that starting to erode now? What has Trump done to the tech ecosystem in the US?
Ooh, yeah, it's complicated. I think that there's still a lot of antagonism. It was a lot of the tech folks donated a lot of money and then went there, including Mark Zuckerberg,
Yeah.
and now they're under the sort of intense eye of Sauron of the FTC again. He's testifying in front of Congress. So these are tricky things. I think that any American company should do the best to work by their government and support their economy, support their employees and colleagues, and there's people across the spectrum in every company, and there should be. What I hope we're able to figure out is some of the polarization which has been driven by social media. If we can turn the knob down on that a bit, I think it'll actually make it easier to connect to each other as humans, our shared goals, and perhaps even find more compromise. Okay. But this might be me being more idealistic.
It does. At the moment, it seems like a stretch, but it's a nice aspiration to have. But it looks like we're a long way from that. Matt, we've got about 4 minutes left on the clock. I want to just do a kind of quick fire round with you before we let you go. One tech trend that you think people are overhyping?
Oh, overhyping. Right now, it's the chat interface. So I think that there's going to be really interesting UI innovations with how we interact with these AIs, LLMs. And we're seeing hints of this right now. I actually think things like Midjourney, where you see other people prompting and can learn from that, are really interesting. Like, what does a social version of this look like? How device form factors change, which, with the Sam Altman, Johnny Ive combo is going to be interesting, but lots of other companies are working on this. How AR comes into this. So both, we already have AR with AirPods and stuff, but if we start to have glasses, and then how social norms go around. Like, when we all sit down at the table, do we check like if the light's on to record? Like, society is going to evolve in ways that will seem kind of ridiculous as it's happening, but if we look back over 5 years, we'll be amazed. Kind of like we went from no one looking at their phone all the time to like everyone on the tube looking at the phone all the time. And so there'll be changes that dramatic. Yeah,
Johnny Ives and OpenAI and Sam Altman appear to want to kind of move away from that and start moving closer to kind of voice-activated hardware, but we still don't know what they're planning. I'll let you.
I'll just say it's also exciting to see sort of a slow tech movement. And if you've come across these devices now, a really amazing one is the Daylight computer, which is like an iPad, that refresh rate of an iPad, but with like a Kindle screen, like black and white. It's kind of orange and black, and so you can use it at night. It doesn't mess up your sleep. You can give it to kids, and they're not as addicted to it. So there's just some little biological things we can do with the design of the hardware that I think could make it a much healthier part of our lives.
One company you wish you had founded?
Ooh, that's a great question. A company I wish I had founded. So it would be things that, because obviously, like, I have so much admiration for like the Apples and Googles of the world.
Yeah.
One that kind of got away is Reddit. And I think Reddit's I love community and community building, and so the idea of shaping communities and giving the ability to create the communities. I'm very sort of playing around with this idea of like cozy communities. So like social networks, which are private, but sort of like they have the usability of like a Facebook or Instagram, but it's just your family or just your friends. Actually, we just launched a fun feature in day one, which is shared journals. So with your partner, with your family, with your therapist, you can have this shared journal, which is fully encrypted. So only accessible on your devices, which, is great. You want to, have something with your partner and talk about your challenges or make goals, or like, it's nice to have that encrypted and private, and there hasn't been really a good way to do that before.
Okay, I like that concept. Automatic, the business, 7 billion valuation. Do you IPO at some point? What are you thinking about in the years ahead for Automatic? Is an IPO in the cards?
Well, one regret I do have is that more members of our communities, like the WordPress community, the WooCommerce community, haven't had the ability to participate in our stock appreciation, which, it started off very modest. Our first valuation in 2005 was $4.4 million, and that we called that a Series A. So along the way, it would have been nice to have some opportunities for people to participate in that. Now, I don't know, IPO is an interesting market and has a lot of factors. But there are some new sort of ways to do SPVs on AngelList and things that actually can open it up, at least to accredited investors. Something like that could be interesting, and sort of it's changing some of the models around like limits of shareholders and things. But being private does give you a lot of flexibility in terms of building for the long term. So you can obviously do that as a public company with Amazon and others, but I think that I'm really trying to build a generational company, and I think these technologies, the promises we're making to our users is that this is something that'll be around decades from now, because you're putting some of your most precious data and thoughts into it. So we take that obligation very seriously. And we're out of time. I just want to say thank you all to anyone who's ever used one of the products we talked about, and choose open source. Vote with your wallet. If you want, the society that you want your children and grandchildren to grow up in, be more open than today's, choose open source.
Yeah. Matt, thank you very much indeed. Matt Mullenweg.
Thank you. Thank you. That's awesome.